There were 3 ravens sat on a tree. Down a down, hey, down a down. They were as black as they might be with a down. One of them said to his mate, "Where shall we our breakfast take? With a down, derry, 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 down, down."
Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of the 3 Ravens podcast. We're on a break at the moment, researching and writing our 5th series, but to fill the gap, this is the first of 5 new compilation episodes containing a trio of stories from across our earlier series. We've entitled this episode 3 Fae Tales because, as you might expect, it contains 3 of our fairy or fairy-adjacent stories, including our Yorkshire story, a discovery of supposed witchcraft, our Wiltshire story, A Cuckoo in Winter, and our Warwickshire story from Series 4, The Hand of God. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and would like access to all of our episodes ad-free, as well as tons of additional content like monthly exclusive episodes, episodes of the 3 Ravens Film Club, our newsletters, stories as text versions, and more, do consider signing up to our Patreon at patreon.com/3 Ravens podcast. In fact, on Thursday we have our brand new Film Club episode for July coming out, all about the 1964 Japanese language classic Onibaba. So if you're desperate for a brand new 3 Ravens episode, then that's where to find it. Otherwise, for our archive of all past episodes and expanded information for each episode, as well as our shop full of 3 Ravens merch, please visit our website at 3ravenspodcast.com. In the meantime, though, we'll start spinning our yarns right after this.
To call me an authority on the subject of witchcraft would be an exaggeration, though there's no denying people do call me John Hephaestus on account of my unmatched alchemical knowledge, as detailed in my famous book, The Metallographia. I am, in truth, but a humble cleric. In truth, I prefer to go by my given name, John Webster, and though some call me a seeker, meaning to belittle my endeavours, such a title is not wholly incorrect. My writings on a range of philosophical subjects have drawn to me a degree of what might be called undue attention. Yet though my Saint's Guide and Academiarium Examen were viewed by some as controversial, it seemed God's will I write them. This is on account of my most firm belief that all men should learn the best truths and the truest rights. For this reason, I state with all assurance, I cannot be an expert in witchcraft, as, to put it simply, witchcraft does not exist. I could not be plainer on this point, and have shown time and again that the works of John Dee and Paracelsus are anything but heretical. As finally demonstrated by both Boyle and Bacon, Dee's practices were naught but natural magic, and in natural magic I am a firm believer, as ought all learned folk endeavour to be. Certainly I know of instances of so-called witches. I was at York Assizes for the trials of Alice Nutter and of Janet Preston, and I journeyed to Lancaster at my own expense to witness the prosecution of the other so-named Pendle witches. Yet all alleged witchcraft is but chicanery. There are a great many sorts of deceivers and impostors in this world, and diverse persons under passive delusions of melancholy and fancy. Yet there is no corporeal league ever made betwixt the devil and these persons. He does not suck on a witch's body or have carnal copulations with them. Nor do witches turn into cats or dogs or any such animals, or raise tempests or the like, which is what my most recent book sets out to prove. To speak of books, you needn't read mine, for the Bible says it all. There is not one word in the Bible that signifies a familiar spirit, or a witch in the sense that's vulgarly intended in common parlance. Likewise, unholy apparitions and the power of the devil. Certainly there is the Witch of Endor in those pages, but the word witch is a mistranslation. For if she was a witch for raising up Samuel, then, well, Jesus Christ must be thought a witch in just the same way for raising up Lazarus, not to mention his most holy self. And forget not that our world is full of wonders mankind has yet not come to understand. Diverse creatures and minerals, such as beryls and crystals, might look miraculous to the foolish, the ignorant and the impious, but such things are natural and not diabolical, as can be proved by the sustained application of reason. Take the fine example from the times just after the Pendle trials, less talked about perhaps by virtue of the man who drew the court's focus being vindicated. His name was, like mine, John, and he was a simpleton. He was known in York for being unlucky. He was tricked and cheated all through his life on account of being innocent to the dark hearts of men. And John, touched in his way, such as he was the last person who ought to face down a judge, let alone a prosecutor such as Durrant Hultham, magistrate of East Riding. But I was there to watch, and I saw justice done. To describe John to you, when I knew him best, he was a dirty fellow. His hair was lank and long, his long nails bedded with mud. He slept often under the open sky up on the moors, coming to town only when he'd gathered sufficient roots and berries to trade with folk for a hot meal and bed. Yet one day John came to York with something new to trade, a sympathetic powder, he called it, one to cure all ailments. And he knew not to sell it for a low price, and clutched the wooden box in which he held it close to his heart to defend it from thieves and cut-purses. It took some time for John to find customers, but find them he did, and lo and behold, the powder worked. I saw a sample of it later in the court. It was white and fine as milled flour, emitting an aroma like the scent of honey. And it was on account of the success of this powder, which brought a long line of people to see John, all with coin to spend for a pinch of his curative dust, that he found himself accused. Folk could not understand how the powder might help a woman with a headache who took it as snuff, then resolve the aches in a cripple's legs when the dust was rubbed upon them. That a man with plague who rubbed it on his buboes would soon enough see them disappear, while a whole house with stop gallant were saved from an affliction all new incurable. This happened not all at once, of course, for John would visit town with his wooden box and sell his wares, and when the box was emptied, he would again stride out onto the moors in all kinds of weather, returning days later with his stocks replenished. The truth of what was happening on those moors was only revealed when John had been clapped in irons. By then he was less thin or soiled in appearance, having bathed and eaten many fine meals and bought himself new clothes. Though Mr. Hultham made quite the statement on John's evils, reading a declaration in which John admitted his powder was magic, when John himself was invited to speak, he explained himself completely. Slowly, I must admit, for John never had a skill with words, but he enlightened the court and saved himself in doing so. He said simply that one night, before day was gone, he was going home from his labours, being very sad and full of heavy thoughts, not knowing how to get meat and drink. Only then he met a fair woman in fine clothes who asked him why he was so sad, and he told her it was by reason of his poverty. To this she said that if he would follow her counsel, she would help him to that which would serve to get him a good living. He consented with all his heart, provided it were not a means to profit by unlawful ways, and she told him that it should not be by any such ways, but by the doing of good and the curing of sick people. The woman warned him strictly to meet her at that spot the next night, the same time. She departed from him, and he went home to the space between an outcrop where he used to lay his head, and the next night, at the time appointed, he duly waited, and she, according to her promise, came and told him it was well he came so duly, otherwise he would have missed that benefit she intended to do him. She bade him follow her and not be afraid, and led him to a little hill. There she knocked 3 times, and the hill opened, and they went in. They came to a fairy hall, wherein was a queen, sitting in great state, and many people about her. The gentlewoman that had brought John there presented him to the queen, and she said he was welcome, and she bid the gentlewoman give John some of the white powder and teach him how to use it. This she did, giving him the little wooden box, bidding him to give grains of it to any that were sick, saying it would heal them. She then brought him forth from the hill, and so they parted. The court was silent as John told his tale, yet questions followed. John was asked by the judge whether the place within the hill, which John called a hall, were light or dark, and John said indifferent, as it is in twilight. Being asked how he got more powder, he said that when he wanted, he went back to that hill and knocked 3 times, whereupon it opened. On going in, he said he was conducted by the aforesaid woman to the queen, and so had more powder given to him. This was the plain and simple story he told before the judge, the whole court and the jury, and there being no proof, save what cures he'd done to very many, the jury did acquit him. Mr. Hotham seemed to judge John rightly accused, for he had the white powder from some spirit, yet there was no contract with the devil, neither was it ever proved that the devil did any good, either real or apparent, but is the sworn enemy of all mankind, both in their souls and in their bodies. Yet John's powder, it wrought that which really was good, namely the curing of diseases, and therefore, rationally, it could not be thought to have been given him by an evil spirit. As for the notion that John had the powder from those people we call fairies, there are many that do believe and affirm that there are such people. Paracelsus hath a treatise holding that the Fae are not the seed of Adam, and therefore he calls them non-Adamics, but he states that they have flesh and bones, and so differ from spirits, yet they can glide through walls and rocks as easily as we through the air, a function which Paracelsus called their chaos. Some call them Savasters, some gnomes, but the proof of their existence is entirely satisfactory. I remember the judge said, when all the evidence was heard, that if he were to assign punishment, then John might well have been whipped, or worse, had his tale been a deceit or an imposture. Yet it was true, so John walked free. It is my view, firmly held, that in all such cases of magic there is an explanation such as this to be discovered. For if it can be proved that a person did murder another, the means should be shown. Elsewise it's delusion to call folk witches, and elsewise, in the fashioning of charms and powders and tonics, if a person has skills as a healer, as I do, then they ought to be praised and rewarded for it, not hanged from a noose until dead. As for John, after the trial he was seen no more, having strode up to the wilds and vanished from view. If I were him, I would have gone to that fairy hall and stayed there. It seems their queen is at least a benevolent ruler, and though they say we must all now give praise to the latest Stuart to take the throne, I refuse. Some say he is a divinely ordained miracle, but I'll tell you this, miracles are no more real than witchcraft.
The tiny shape of the bird circling above me is a dark grey smudge against a lighter grey sky. I pause in my sketching, tearing my eyes away from my charcoals to the sky and trying to make out the bird, but it's too far away, too small, too indistinct, and I lose sight of it as it flutters high above the megaliths. I'm sketching the shape of a skull, a broad standing stone at my back. I like being outside in the air, hearing the sounds of the dig around me, despite the biting breeze. I often joke to Alexander that I spend more time with the dead than the living, but he's just the same. We've both always been fascinated by the past. Actually, it's how we met. Alexander had been an archaeologist for his whole career, while I was an artist first. I sometimes wish that we'd met in Paris while I was exhibiting there, in a different world, a glamorous, champagne-coloured world. But Alexander and I met at an excavation, with soil beneath our fingernails, and the excitement of discovery shining in our eyes. Alexander had just founded the Morven Institute of Archaeological Research, which I joined to further my interest in trying to understand our ancestors. He likes nothing better than the dig itself, brushing dust and earth away to reveal buried secrets, and I help him bring them back to life. It started by accident, when I'd been drawing one of the skulls we found at Chippenham and had absently started to round out the face as we talked. Alexander had looked at what I'd done and asked me if I could create a full reconstruction of how the owner of the skull might have looked in life. Since then, I've been doing it for every new find. We talk for hours about the lives people from the ancient past might have led, what they ate, what they wore, the tools they used. It's more than our work, it's our obsession. Alexander once brought bones to bed. Archaeology is the most dangerous sort of addiction, because you know there will always be more to find. For me, too, it's an act of imagination. I can approximate bone structure and facial muscles and fat, but I choose hair and eye colour, add clothing, tell myself stories about the personalities and feelings these bare bones once possessed. When Alexander found out about Avebury, the sale was completed almost before he told me where we'd be going. He'd been married twice before, and I had my history too, but it was Avebury which decided us, and at the manor he'd bought to form the base of operations for the dig, I became his third wife. The shout comes from further away down the two parallel lines of stones we call Kennet Avenue. They've found something. I run towards the shout, leaving my sketchbook behind, already able to catch Alexander's excited voice as it dances towards me on the breeze. He's down in the pit, sleeves rolled up and forearms brown with mud. I can see the shape of the half-buried megalith, the one we call Stone 38, which Alexander and his team have been steadily excavating, and below it, the pearly sheen of old bone. There is a peculiar excitement for me in uncovering human remains, in a way that I never feel for a pot or a hoard of coins. I suppose it's the feeling that this person, whoever they may have been, once breathed and talked and experienced all the trappings of life just as I do. They laughed, they wept, they loved, they lost. We'll have to excavate carefully to establish whether the skeleton is complete, which could take many long hours of work. But the first thing Alexander does when we make a discovery is always the same, and has nothing to do with the mechanics of the dig. It's almost a superstition now, I think, but Alexander insists that it's important to record the local legends as we work. I don't know where he found George Snellgrave, a man who seems so aged that his weathered face resembles one of the buried stones, but whenever we find something of note, Alexander wants Snellgrave there. I can understand why, and not just because Snellgrave looks old enough to actually remember some of the centuries-old legends he recounts as though they happened yesterday. But Alexander insists we record everything he says. He has some idea of tying the folk legends to the facts when we eventually exhibit the finds. There's a bit of bumbling around the stones while we wait for Snellgrave to be fetched from Avebury village. Alexander climbs out of the trench around Stone 38 and squeezes my hands excitedly. "I hope he's complete," he says, and I know he's talking about the skeleton. I wonder how he died. I wonder too, as I look down at the exposed sternum and protruding clavicle we can see below the stone. Will this find tell us something vital about the ritual practices of early man? Will it open a tantalising door into the distant past through which Alexander and I can step, walking the long road back until we lose ourselves? The brother and sister who hang around the dig and run errands for us when we need soon return with George Snellgrave, leaning on a walking stick which looks as though it's been cut from a still living tree. His eyes are a blue so light they remind me of the cold, flat sky above us. Alexander rushes forward and shakes his hand warmly, chattering 19 to the dozen, filling Snellgrave in on the details of the discovery and asking him if he knows of any mythic significance concerning a man buried under a stone. I can see some of our colleagues rolling their eyes, but Alexander believes that the local legends have value, so nobody actively challenges it. "Oh yes, I wonder when he'd turn up," Snellgrave says, as though he's expected our vital find for weeks. "He? Who?" Alexander says, with the eagerness of a schoolboy for a half-holiday. "Oh, you don't know that old story," Snellgrave says, with the faint incredulity he always greets our ignorance about local hearsay. Alexander assures him that we do not, and the old man settles himself at the side of the trench, legs dangling down between the struts, and lights the half-smoked and evil-smelling cigarette he keeps behind his ear, and begins. It was somewhere in the middle of the 15th century or thereabouts that a new priest came to Avebury and began preaching against the stones. They were bad luck, said the holy man, and leftover relics from pagan days when men talked to birds and rivers and mistook them for gods. Stones like that had no place in the Valley of God, and the only thing to do was to pull them down and break them up, and bury them deep in the earth where pious folk might never see them. He thought the stones were haunted, you see, by ghostly guardians, demons of fog and air who would whisper dark and delightful words to the people of Avebury and turn their heads and hearts. So the word went out in Avebury that the stones were to be broken, and all the local men took hammers and picks and went about it. None was accepted, old or young, even those who thought in their private hearts that the ancient monuments were best left well alone. Among them was John Dancy the cordwainer, though his slim fingers were best suited to detailed work and not the rough task of stone breaking. He had no appetite for it either, preferring to sit alone with his shoes and listen to the birds rather than shout and gossip with the other men. He was a lonely soul, and had never found another to tell all his thoughts. Still, he lent his strength, for he wanted no questions asked by the new priest or any other, and he heaved on the ropes with the rest when they were bringing the stones down. He was standing by, though, when they were about to bring down that stone you now call number 38. That was when he saw a tiny grey bird with a striped chest and golden feet just below where the stone would come crashing down. It wasn't moving, but sat helpless, seeming unable to even hop, let alone fly. John Dancy could see, even from his distance, that it was a cuckoo, though winter had come. Everybody knows that cuckoos are never seen in winter, because they go underground to stay warm. John Dancy didn't pause to think. Within moments the stone would be down and the injured cuckoo would be crushed, so he darted in and carefully picked up the bird in his hands and stowed it in his jacket, hiding it away from the sight of others. If he'd been any slower, both he and the bird would have been ground to nothing more but blood and stone dust. As soon as he could, he slipped away from the work party toppling the stones and went back to his own home, outside the main part of the village, but close to the trees. When he took off his jacket and let the tiny cuckoo out onto the table, he soon saw why it hadn't been able to fly away. One of its wings was broken, and it wasn't able to do any more than flap the other frantically. But John Dancy was careful with his hands, and he took his finest cut strips of leather, and with time and coaxing he managed to set the cuckoo's broken wing straight so it might heal. Well, a cordwainer's cottage was no place for a wild bird, so when night fell, John Dancy said to himself that he would take the cuckoo back to the stone ring where he'd found it and set it free. As he set out, black clouds knitted themselves together over his head, making the night sky appear darker than it was, and soon a heavy rain fell down and a fierce storm battered Avebury. John Dancy was on the point of turning back more than once, and he was less and less sure about leaving the cuckoo alone, but he reached the stones nonetheless. Many had been toppled already by the work of the village men, but there were some yet standing. John Dancy made his way to the tallest of the stones so it might provide some shelter for the little bird. But as he nestled the bird in the hollow of grass beneath the stone, lightning sliced open the sky, leaving a jagged white scar. John Dancy threw himself to the ground as the lightning struck it. When he thought it was safe to open his eyes again, he saw with amazement that a great space like the portal to a tomb had opened below the huge standing stone, just where the lightning had hit. In the entrance, for John Dancy could see that was what it was, the grey cuckoo, miraculously unscathed by the bolt of white fire, fluttered as though it were waiting for something. Its wing was whole and good as new. He got slowly to his feet. Beyond the bird was a dark doorway into the space underneath the stone. John Dancy knew, though the cuckoo spoke no words, that it wanted him to follow it into that dark passage. And though he had no light, and he was wet through from the rain, he did follow. He walked, and it was too dark to see the cuckoo, but he heard its wing beats ahead of him. He walked until the darkness flowed away like poured water, and stars drifted around John Dancy's head. In time, the stars gave way to flaming torches and braziers full of burning coals. Some of the flames were different colours, blues and greens and deep, vivid purples. On he went, until the cave he was walking through began to resemble the gracious house of many centuries previous, a square villa with tall columns and a low, sunken pool in the centre. Within the pool a great table floated, held up seemingly by nothing. It was covered in a thick cloth the colour of the night sky, in whose folds and gathers fireflies seemed to hide and chase each other. Every available inch groaned under the weight of a strange and opulent hospitality. Ropes of pearls and diamonds decorated huge golden and silver platters, displaying the heads of parrots bursting with caviar, with fishes chasing each other in perpetual aspic, with jellies containing violets and roses. In the centre of the table, a sculpture in ice in the shape of two dragons swallowing each other whole bore a glistening pile of fruit. Mysterious and beautiful perfumes drifted around the table. In the pool, nymphs and dolphins frolicked and splashed, their soft laughter a delicate harmony to the silvery chimes of a chorus of dulcimers. Above the table, strange birds with coloured plumage and bright red eyes soared and called to each other. Some of the birds were books which flapped their pages like wings. The cuckoo flew away behind one of the columns, and when John Dancy stopped to gaze in wonder at everything around him, a figure came round the other side of the column where the bird had vanished. He wore silk in all the colours of the sky, and a crown of silver cuckoo feathers. Behind him, dancers dressed in flowers and shells began to move sinuously. He slid through the dancers like spilled oil and came to greet John Dancy. He was long and slim, with legs and arms which seemed to give the impression of more legs and arms, although there were only two of each. There was something of the spider in the way he moved, sinuous, coordinated. His hair was the colour of smoke and ashes, and changed in the light, so it looked light silver at times and darkest black at others. His mouth was so full of sharp teeth that a kiss would have cut his lover's lips to ribbons. As the Cuckoo Prince came closer, John Dancy could see that his feet were bare. In all this magnificence, he had no shoes to warm his feet. "You've given me passage back to my kingdom of mysteries," said the Cuckoo Prince. "Only one thing I ask of you. You are a cordwainer, a maker of new shoes. My toes are cold and my feet are bleeding from years of long wandering. Make me a pair of shoes, and in exchange, I will give you all the gifts of my land." John Dancy said that he would make the shoes, for he was mesmerised by the sight of the shimmering fairy prince who had been the cuckoo he had saved. But he said that he had no tools with him to make the shoes, and would have to journey home to fetch them. The pool beneath the banquet table began to bubble and steam, its clear waters changing to cloudy black and orange magma. Black tentacles began to crawl from the water. "No need to leave," said the Cuckoo Prince. "I have everything here that you need." "Then I will stay," said John Dancy. The waters calmed and the tentacles vanished. The Cuckoo Prince led John Dancy through his grotto. The walls were seamed with copper and gold, and here and there clusters of glowworms softly illuminated the juts and hollows of the black rock. Although they must be deep below the surface of the earth, there seemed to be open sky above them with subtly changing weather. Comets shooting across the sky, the occasional light flurry of snow. It seemed as though the cavern was unfurling before them, new rooms popping into existence as the Cuckoo Prince required them. He took John Dancy to an approximation of a cordwainer's workshop, though it was worlds away from the simple room in Avebury. Its walls were studded with pearlescent shells, and the whole thing gleamed with a pale greenish lustre. Monstrous oysters in the walls opened their mouths as Dancy passed, showing glorious, unnaturally huge pearls cushioned in their hearts. Some of the pearls' surfaces moved with wispy smoke. Some of them had eyes. John Dancy took to the workbench, and there he found leather of silver and leather of gold and thread spun from glittering spider's silk. There was even a pot of boar bristles like those he used to guide the thread through the leather at home, but instead of black and coarse, they were white and as soft as clouds. John cut and measured and fitted the shapes of the shoes around the Cuckoo Prince's feet. His long toes flexed and unfurled, and sometimes they tapped on the floor restless and changed into birds' feet and then back again. At last the shoes were made, and they were like no shoes John Dancy had ever made before. They were long-toed turn shoes of gold and silver, and they were held together with stitches as fine and invisible as gossamer. The Cuckoo Prince put on the shoes, and they fitted him as though they were a part of his feet. "My wandering is finished," he said. "You have given me this gift, and now I will give you mine." From that moment, the strange and glorious world below the standing stones unfolded its wings and revealed itself to John Dancy. The Cuckoo Prince took his hand and brought him to the feasting table. They ate slices of a stuffed roast swan with 3 heads, and the Cuckoo Prince cut into a huge pie with a gleaming crust which seemed to tremble as though there were something alive inside it, and a flock of birds never seen in England's skies burst free and whirled around the table. He handed John Dancy a twisted blue wineglass whose stem was a live snake which curled around his hand and hissed with a poet's tongue. 3 days John Dancy stayed in the house of the Cuckoo Prince. 3 days passed in pleasure and wonder. 3 nights passed too, curled in the Cuckoo Prince's bed, whose long posts were trees laden with fruit of every colour which burst open into silver-winged butterflies as they found delight there. Each kiss was bright as ice, and left red marks lingering like petals. But after 3 days and 3 nights, John Dancy sighed and said that he must go back to his village. There were those who would think him dead, and his old father was alone in the world without him. Although they rarely spoke to one another, John Dancy knew that he had responsibilities. When he told the Cuckoo Prince that he must leave him, an expression of sorrow painted the ageless face of the fairy, but he didn't argue. Instead, he reached into a silk-lined casket full of emeralds and took out a fragile green egg, which he handed to John Dancy. "Keep it safe and never crack it," said the prince, "no matter how you are tempted." He took a wine goblet and spilled its contents onto the floor of the grotto. The pool of wine seemed suddenly to deepen, widening out before them until it was a great dark lake. Then he gave the cordwainer an ice-cold kiss and pushed him into the pool. John Dancy fell through the black waters without once becoming wet. Fish swam around him, silver and black. Each fish had the Cuckoo Prince's face, and while some smiled, the scaly features of others were split wide in screams. John Dancy woke by the standing stone. There was no sign of a split in the ground, or that lightning had struck at all. The ground was cold, but it was hard as though it hadn't rained for weeks. Over the 3 days and 3 nights, the cordwainer had become used to the heavy scented air in the Cuckoo Prince's grotto, and the cold blast of Wiltshire wind knocked the breath from him. He walked into the village in a daze. But where was the village? Where were the houses he remembered? There was the forge, but its front had changed almost beyond all recognition. There was a cottage that he knew, but next to it was a tall new building with a jauntily painted sign which proclaimed it the King's Arms, established 1747. John Dancy thought that he couldn't trust his eyes, so he went into the inn. All around him were people in the strangest clothes, more outlandish to his eyes than anything in the fairies' kingdom. He stared at them, and they stared at him too, out of place in his workman's clothes. Somehow he found the voice to ask the nearest man for the date. "Why, you fool," said the man, flicking the strange long skirts of his coat. "It's the year 1770, the reign of King George III. 1770? John Dancy exclaimed, his voice trembling. "Then my father." He stumbled from the inn and made his way to the churchyard, which was still where he remembered it to be. Tears blinded his eyes as he wandered those sorrowful aisles, and each time he saw the name of a person he had known with their date of death 300 years ago, he let out an anguished cry. 300 years! 300 years he had been below the earth, and yet it had felt like just 3 days. At last he found his father's name, written on a humble cross in the far corner of the churchyard under a holly bush, and he knew that allowing him to return had not been the Cuckoo Prince's gift, but his curse. There was nothing left for John Dancy in Avebury now. Night was falling as he made his slow way back to the standing stones, his thoughts wild and disordered. Where had he to go except back below the earth? But the ground was whole, and the night clear and bright, with no sign of a coming storm which would open the passage to the barrow for him again. He shouted and called and drummed his hands against the stone, but it was stern and silent. At last, in desperation, he took out the green egg the fairy prince had given him, and though he had been told not to, he crushed its shell in his fist and cracked it. As soon as the shell was broken, a cuckoo made of mist and stars shot out of the shards of eggshell and flew up into the sky. With the bird's release, John Dancy aged 300 years all in an instant, for in the egg his old age had been curled. He died on that spot, by the barred entrance to that other world, and when his body was found by the curious villagers of the 18th century, he was buried by the stone here, for nobody knew who he was or could fathom why he should be wearing the clothes of long ago. There's silence after Snellgrave finishes speaking, and then one of our archaeologists starts laughing. "That's a fairy tale," he says. "That's nothing to do with any provable facts. You can't know that any of that actually happened." "Well, that's a story and you asked for it," says Snellgrave, annoyed, and he stumps off soon after, leaning on his great staff. Alexander is subdued after the old man's departure, and I know that he's disappointed. "It could be interesting once we can date the bones," I say, sounding silly even to myself. "Are they from the 18th century or the 15th? Let's see who emerges when I do the reconstruction, if the skull's intact." He squeezes my hand and nods, but both of us know that anything we come up with here will just be conjecture. And Snellgrave's wild tale hasn't helped us with anything concrete. "Buy Snellgrave a pint of the King's Arms, will you?" he says to one of the others. "And perhaps our man here dates from the 18th century. Well, that's still nearly 200 years old. It's something. I know we were all hoping for an example of Neolithic man, but there it is. I'm going up to the house to write some notes. Carry on." He removes himself shortly after, and I know it's to hide his annoyance from our colleagues. Although I too am disappointed, Snellgrave's strange story stays with me as I return to my station at the back of the tall megalith with my charcoals and sketchbook. I find my hand idly tracing some of the images from his tale, peculiar fish and fantastical birds. When I next look up at the sky, there's a bird circling above me. I wonder if it's the same one as I saw earlier. I can't make out the markings on its breast, but I can't help thinking of the lost cuckoo which held all John Dancy's 300 years of age, endlessly fluttering in the white winter sky and trying to get back underground.
Listen to that wind. You know, there was once a mother whose blood was cursed, the daughter of dragons, riders of the gales. In your fingers you hold her treasures, the jewels gifted by Leofric, her lord. Don't move. Don't struggle. I have a blade to your throat, old man. Only listen. For when the first Vikings came to England, evil came with them. One of their number, Robert the Cursed, was a berserker, a wild and fearsome beast of battle. His shadow was not black, but red with blood. And when the moon rose, his skin split, his bones broke, and from his flesh a wolf did hatch to rampage with endless hunger. Who could defy such a man? The answer is simple. No one. Who could love such a man? The answer is not simple. Her name was Ermanhild, and she was a warrior too, a princess of Mercia, whose pale white skin was stained with sins of her own. A war band leader, boat burner, but she had royal blood, strong blood that could carry a curse and make it fruit. Yet the poison in the veins of Robert the Cursed was damned. Forsaken by Odin, forsaken by Thor, forsaken by all but Fenrir and his lying father, Loki. The shape of the love of Robert and Ermenhilda was pain. A signal fire in the cold night, born beneath Valkyrie wings. And from their union, amidst the clinging ash and depths of slaughter, the son they bore was called Buka, for the boy was not a child of men. Their son was Elfar, a fairy child. Sometimes a worm hiding in caves, sometimes a Morgan of the sea, sometimes a raven of the sky, sometimes a boar with skin of flames and tusks like rusted iron. His name was Thorold, and he was a dragon untamable. A beast who suckled on the teats of forest does, who feasted on the eggs of carrion crows. Robert the Cursed was dead before long, Ermenhilda dead too, both Draugr, both lain low within a lonely cairn. But Thorold had no need of them. His dark heart beat with all the pain of every sin carried by Cain, your deathless father of all fallen beasts and devils. For such a being, what need is there for love? For Thorold had no love for gold, no love for silver, tin or bronze. But women were treasure for his dragon heart, his dragon soul. He was a terror across the land, from the holy kingdom of Lindsay to these lands here in Wearingskire. It was at Alucas Grove he found the one who calmed his storm. Elfwine. She had no other name. A daughter of the other world, slipped out from Anun's lands. She sang to Thorold, offered succor, and made with him twin children there beside the water's edge. Thorold did not see Elfwine grow fat with babes. He went, rampager, back to the forest and the caves, into the ocean spray and the wind, where he rode as lightning, snaking out below the moon. But Elfwine, she did bring those infants forth, within the forests, a night harvest of daughters, 2 Fae maids with glowing eyes and skin of bright star fire. The first was the wolf gift, Wolfifa, her father's daughter. The second was the gift of God, your God, my God, a forgotten God without a name. She was Godiva, whose jewels that you now hold within your shaking fist. Try not to panic, for I do not want my blade to slip. I know your fear, Abbot Walter. I smell the panic sweat upon your brow. But the tale of these stones is legend, myth, and you must know such things, for you seek to preach to others. Do you not, holy man? And so know the tale of Godiva. For here, on this holy ground, once stood the church she built in praise of your triple-headed God. Father, Son, Spirit, a 3-weave plait in the cloth of time. But you, Abbot Walter, brought her temple crashing to the earth. And then
built this place. A castle of tombs, not built for him, but for the glory of William the Bastard, thief of all these lands. No, no, do not beg, Abbot Walter, only listen. Hear the wind and the wisdom of the worms that whispers through the gaps within your window frames. For through your fingers pass these gems, linked like all the past upon a cord of gold. Carnelian and peridot, emerald, turquoise, sapphire, and amethyst. Please keep them moving by your holy finger and your sacred thumb. There, jacinth, onyx, jasper, beryl, lapis, amarine. One of each of your new God's prayers. Make them while you have a tongue with which to speak. For these are the sacred stones of Godiva, holy man, a gift to her from Leofric, Earl of Mercia. You know of him, saw him die. For he was once Thane of all these lands, those ruled before by Leofwine, his father, who was placed unto Mercia's throne of salt at Tamworth by Canute, he who called upon the very oceans to tremble in their tides. Do you feel the wealth of all those kingdoms in your hand? That is good, Abbot Walter. Please keep praying, for all the ghosts of all those dead are watching you and I. These jewels, you see, were once the crown of Godiva, gifted unto her by Leofric on their wedding day. For though Wulfifa was her father's child, so like him, cursed, a wild wolf maid who ran beneath the moon and drank the blood of men. But her sister, the hand of God, was the day to Wulfifa's night. A beauty like no other, Godiva's hair grew long and red as the face of the fierce sun. Its glow lit within Leofric a fire set to burn until his dying day. Yet Godiva was not his to claim at first. She had been wed to his brother, Godwin, the richest man in all these lands. The firstborn, like she, given by Elfwine to broker peace between the Fae and men. The tale of Godwin and Leofric is the same as the first brothers. For Godwin was the glory child, beloved by all. Leofric, the second son, was not to be adored. And so, with jealous lust and rage, Leofric beat his brother down into the dirt, holding but a stone within his hands. And then Leofric claimed Godiva for his own, a pure white soul to cleanse the horror from his own. Yet Godwin's sons, born from Godiva's womb, were always in Leofric's mind. But Wulfric fathered only daughters, and Ethelwine died alongside Harold Godwin's son beneath the bastard's blade. and Leofric did hold hate for them, hate for Godiva for bearing them as princess in these lands. He was a jealous thane whose hunger was an endless thing gnawing at his mind. For none was unto Leofric true relief. He called on all to pay to him their gold, their jewels in tribute. Gathered to his chest the wealth of all Mercia who lived to him in thrall. And Godiva saw the folly in his acts, the pain of all his greed. The hunger of all peoples rose into an endless moan which raged across the lands like the gales you hear tonight. It was a terror to her, and so Godiva set to saving them, and the soul of Leofric too, for she begged him, Abbot Walter, pleaded on her knees to Leofric as if he were her god. Said, "Take my crown and break it. Give it to the starving men who stagger in the streets. Sell the jewels you gave to me for bread for women, meat to make their children grow strong." Leofric laughed to this, but still she begged. All things she tried. To love Leofric, bring him sons, and their firstborn, Elfgar, was a golden prince, the honor of all. Though Leofric loved him not, and could not see within him hope for all that might then come. Though still Godiva begged him, from sun-up to sundown, and all the hours beneath the moon, and for he would not hear her, she sought the wisdom of the holy men to whom she brought Wolfifa, that sister whose red and bloody lips did speak wild magic, who was untamed and feared by all who ever knew her name. Though through Godiva's love, her prayers and kindness, and wisdom of the priests who knew the darkness of her soul, through holy fire and sacrifice, the rage within Wolfifa then was quelled. Godiva showed this miracle to Leofric, her sister, beast no longer, now a holy maid. And Leofric's heart was moved. He gave to Wolfifa the Nurden lands, Hoch forests, and a place from then which was known as Wolfifa's Valley. And in this act Godiva saw in Leofric a shaded candle flame of hope, which through her breath and hands she kindled to a blaze. "My husband Thane," Godiva said, "your people hunger, beg and starve, and so what penance can I do? What service can I offer for you to show some mercy unto them?" With twisted smile, Leofric laughed. "You can ride on horseback all through the town of Kofa's Tree with not a stitch of clothing on your back. Be shamed, be in your nakedness before the hungry wolves you so adore. For you will see, Godiva, the truth of men that day. They will tear your flesh from off your bones. there is no goodness in their hearts, and all the gold I take from them is better in my hands. You know this urge, Abbot Walter, the voice that speaks to you of things to own. For you are just the same. Here in this stone castle to your king, with pictures of your triple-headed God upon the wall, you keep the riches of the people just the same. Better in your hands, say the whisper in your mind, than trusted unto them who clawed it from the earth. Do not protest. I see the golden twists upon your robes, the glimmer of your rood. And look down at your hands and see them there. The jewels of Godiva, the beads of prayer in which her years of penance still are sealed. And penance did she undertake for Leofric's jest, the threat of a most fearful, naked ride upon her horse all through the streets of Coffa's Tree. It was to her a promise, a pledge to save the people of this land from ruin at her husband's greed. So it was, Godiva, fairy maid, did wake one day and cast all things beside. No shift, no veil, no crown. And she did climb upon her horse, and all her serving women wailed and said, Godiva, you cannot show your pale white skin of moonbeams to the world. The eyes of men will lust for you. And if you perish, all hope of Mercia will then die with you. Yet Godiva would not be deterred. And so her serving women ran to Coffa's Tree and gave word which spread like flocks of birds through fresh sown fields. And many of the people went into their homes and closed their doors, shut up their windows, for their hearts were pure. Others, lustful men, came out into the roads to see the high-born lady in her nothingness, with hunger within them for more than food alone. You know this hunger, Abbot, do you not? Touch those gemstones and think upon it. For that day, Godiva did not ride at speed. She walked her brood mare slow into the town, the hoof prints sounding soft within the sucking mud. And her hair, red as forge embers, hung about her and blew within the wind, and her eyes did glow, and her skin was silver pale and light as bright star fire. None did watch, but your triple-headed God must have seen, must have spied her nakedness, her pure heart, her sacrifice. And those few men who thought to spy upon her, once slavering, once desirous of her, did turn away for shame. Save one, they say, who in his peeping then was turned to stone, as if upon a basilisk he spied, staring at the beast from eye to monstrous eye. Forget not, Abbot, that dragon blood was in Godiva. Fae blood, cursed blood. She was of worm and sea beast, of cave depth and wild wind, until that day when God from her lifted off the curse within her blood, though the curse passed down from fathers to sons from Eden's fall, until that day was baked still into the child, even then budding in her womb. Leofric learned of what she had done, and he too fell onto his knees, in part to her, in part to praise her God. For Godiva showed him gold is not for hoarding like a dragon, nor is any treasure, be it woman, man, or all things of this earth. And so, through this, Leofric learned to love Godiva and his son Elfgar, who was exiled by your king. And most of all, he did love God, and gave his hoard away, paid all his coin to build monasteries to the Virgin at Wirgoncaster, Leominster, Caerleon, and Vinicas. Together, Leofric and Godiva broke the abbey ground at Evesham, where, in the chapel of St. Nicholas, the saint of all repentant thieves, the icons hung with necklaces of Godiva's own silver. The gold and silver rood at the abbey of St. Paul, the life-size cross and Jesus who hung upon it, was forged by Manic, smith of Leofric, and his wife. What happened to that treasure when the bastard came, Abbot? Yes, it was melted down and used to pay for swords and axes, the self-same the Norsemen used to cut the Mercian people down. And Godiva broke her crown to give to God, but the holy men would not accept that gift. They had Manic spin it to the golden thread that you now hold, a means to count her prayers. One by one, she uttered them in praise of her God on high, the one who broke the curse which lived within her blood. Yet, Abbot, you know the truth. For though the Vikings came with curses, the Norseman who with William the Bastard sailed the whale road to these lands, they too brought doom within their hearts. For Leofric, who fought with Siward against Godwin's son, was buried here, in this ground, though I see no marker of his grave in your new temple. Perhaps his restless soul will haunt you for this slight. So many died. Old kings and earls of all this land. But even to the bastard, Godiva was too sacred to cut down. the only woman in all England to whom the Norseman left her lands to rule. She did so with honor until she died of age, the final queen of Mercia. What of her then, Abbot? Where is her tomb? Where is her icon, in glory or in stone? I see you do not know. But her treasures, you keep these close, here within your temple, here within your hands. And so I have come to you with word of one forgotten in this place, the cursed babe that grew within Godiva when she took that naked ride. You cannot say his name for fear that he will step forth from the storm as I have done this night, but I will speak it for you and whisper to your holy ear of he that is profane. He comes and seeks revenge for all the people of Leofric, all the people of Godiva, and the sins he commits have soaked his skin in blood. Which is why, Abbot Walter, I have come to take from you the gemstone prayer cord you hold within your hands, and all Godiva's treasures you are hiding in this place of Norseman stone. Release your grip and let Godiva's relic slip with me into the night. For in one hand I hold my dagger, and the other now is empty, seeking charity or sacrifice. Which, I wonder, will be to you the hand of God.
God send every gentleman, such hounds, such hawks, such leman, with a down, derry, 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 down.